Is Donald Trump demonstrating that the West no longer controls Africa by doing what no other US president has dared to do? Or is the West's increasingly frantic attempt to maintain power being reflected in his strong position against Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali? The worst part is still to come. What if these three small Sahelian countries are poised to challenge Western exploitation and change the norms of global dominance, something entire continents have failed to do? Let's investigate. Once confined to the periphery of world affairs, the Sahel is currently at the epicenter of an extraordinary geopolitical maelstrom. Three countries that many Western observers have written off as being poor and unimportant, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali, are rewriting the history of African resistance. Their disobedience goes beyond mere symbolism. These countries have publicly denounced Western powers, rejected exploitative deals, and driven out foreign forces. The populace is supporting their leaders with unheard of anonymity as they unreservedly prioritize African sovereignty. Let's introduce Donald Trump. He has adopted a tough posture against these countries since returning to the White House, seeing their actions as a direct challenge to American power. The harsh measures of his administration are making the situation worse, causing a conflict that might change how Africa interacts with the West and the rest of the globe. We'll examine the underlying roots of Sahelian disobedience, the significance of Niger's stunning coup in this developing story, and how Trump's strategy may be the last straw for Western domination in Africa in order to comprehend this seismic shift. Why, therefore, are Sahelian countries so brazenly opposing the West? You must begin with the fundamentals in order to comprehend the resistance of the Sahel. Why has this area been so tightly controlled by the West for so long? A poisonous concoction of disdain, reliance, and exploitation holds the solution. Countries like Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali have been viewed for decades as little more than suppliers of oil, gold, uranium, and raw resources that enrich Western economies at the expense of their destitute inhabitants. However, something has changed. These countries' leaders have decided that enough is enough after being emboldened by military takeovers and strong public support. Their audacity isn't arbitrary. It's the result of years of annoyance and a developing understanding that everyone except Africa gains from the status quo. For instance, Burkina Faso. The youngest African leader, President Ibrahim Traoré, has come to represent rebellion. He has criticized the West for its hypocrisy in vehement speeches, citing years of conditional aid and military actions that prioritized Western interests over the security of Africa. Under his direction, Burkina Faso nationalized its gold mines, drove out French troops, and started paving the way for independence. In the meantime, Niger has focused on uranium, a resource that hasn't done much for the country's growth, but is essential for powering Europe. Under contracts that left Niger with crumbs, Western corporations have been extracting uranium from its mines for years. Niger's current demands for renegotiations that take into account the actual worth of its resources point to a larger change in how African countries interact with the international economy. Mali has also taken decisive action. Following the withdrawal of foreign soldiers, the nation has improved relations with its neighbors, creating a regional coalition that seeks to oppose outside intervention as a group. Cultural sovereignty has also been given top priority by Mali's government, who have redesigned educational systems to emphasize African languages and history above colonial legacies. There was more than one wave of defiance. Decades of exploitation served as its catalyst, and the knowledge that the West's promises of progress frequently came at the expense of genuine sovereignty only served to exacerbate it. The tipping point, though, that occurred in Niger, when the region's relationship with the West was drastically altered by a coup. The coup in Niger in 2023 was more than a simple political upheaval. It was a covert revolution. General Abdourahmane Tiani did more than simply overthrow a government when he took control. Decades of neo-imperial rule were declared to be over by him. Tiani exposed the depth of Niger's problems with the United States and its Western allies in a scathing speech that went viral around the continent. He described a counterinsurgency strategy that put Western security ahead of Nigerian life, predatory contracts that left Niger rich in resources but poor in wealth, and a military presence that felt more like occupation than collaboration. The taxing of US military planes operating in Niger was among the most startling disclosures. Even though the US was profiting from operations that frequently had little to do with Niger's security while using Nigerian airspace, Niger was not benefiting. Kiani wasn't hesitant to expose this as neo-imperialism in its most blatant form. The people of Niger, who perceived the coup as a return to their sovereignty, overwhelmingly supported it. The administration announced plans to examine all agreements with foreign powers, and crowds celebrated as US forces were withdrawn. This was a matter of dignity for the people of Niger, not only politics. However, Washington was likewise alarmed by the coup. Chiani's actions were seen by the US, led by Donald Trump, as a direct challenge to its authority in Africa. Aid was stopped, sanctions were put in place, and the tone became more antagonistic. But the knock-on impact was something Trump didn't expect. In defiance of Chiani, laid the groundwork for a broader, continent-wide movement by encouraging other countries in the Sahel and beyond to reevaluate their ties with the West. So, is Donald Trump inadvertently promoting African unification? Add your voice to the total liberation of Africa by leaving a comment in the comments section below. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more informative videos like this one. Let's proceed. A new chapter in US foreign policy has begun with Donald Trump's return to the White House. It has been full of mistakes, but none more obviously significant than his strategy for Africa. Trump's administration has presented its activities in the Sahel as necessary responses to increasing instability, all under the guise of regaining America's influence on the international scene. However, the truth is much less flattering and much more complex. The core of this strategy is Trump's choice to intensify on aggressive strategies, an action that betrays a more profound ignorance of Africa's changing political environment. The Sahel, which is frequently depicted in Western narratives as a region rife with turmoil and insurgency, has seen significant transformation in recent years. Rejecting exploitative alliances and regaining their sovereignty, nations such as Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali have resisted Western influence. Trump has adopted a hostile approach, viewing these countries' defiance as a danger rather than a chance for communication, rather than interacting with them on an equal basis. The nomination of Matt Gaetz as Attorney General is among the most contentious aspects of Trump's Africa policy. Even in American political circles, Gaetz is a divisive personality who is notorious for his uncompromising beliefs and provocative statements. His role has been nothing short of catastrophic for the Sahel. Since his initial remarks in public, Gaetz made it apparent that he believed the government of Niger to be anti-American, as was the largest Sahelian resistance. He declared that the United States must take into account all alternatives, including military involvement, to safeguard its interests, and accused the governments of the region of encouraging instability. He rejected the justifiable complaints of Niger's leadership as merely justifications for poor leadership in a particularly inflammatory speech, portraying their demands for sovereignty as an effort to avoid accountability. In addition to being tone-deaf, his comments were an outright insult to countries who have long been exploited by the West. Such rhetoric resonated in the Sahel, where colonialism and neo-imperialism have left profound scars. Gaetz's remarks were seen by African leaders as evidence of the West's resistance to change or listen. They became a rallying cry for Africans, for their government's refusal to accept influence from the West. The consequences were immediate. Leaders and activists throughout the area denounced Gaetz's remarks, characterizing them as representative of a larger Western conceit. People carrying posters condemning US meddling and demanding stronger African unity erupted in protests in a number of Sahelian capitals. Hashtags praising the removal of foreign forces and emphasizing the Sahel's struggle for dignity swept social media. Beyond Africa, Gates's words also had unforeseen repercussions. It widened the gap between the US and other superpowers that have positioned themselves as supporters of African sovereignty, especially China and Russia. Chinese and Russian officials were offering assistance, while Gates was brushing off Niger's complaints, presenting their engagement as collaborations rather than favoritism. Given this, Gates's strategy and Trump's more comprehensive Africa policy has aggressively undermined US influence in the Sahel, in addition to failing to restore it. African nations have become more united and determined to oppose Western domination as a result of the administration's escalation of tensions and rejection of valid complaints. This error of judgment exposes a basic weakness in Trump's foreign policy, which is its dependence on antiquated tactics that are out of date in an era where African countries are establishing themselves as equals on the international scene. Trump and Gates have increased their confrontational stance instead of recognizing these changes, which might further isolate the United States in one of the world's most geopolitically important regions. Trump's larger African approach exposes a serious error. However, that isn't it. His government has used coercive rather than cooperative methods in an effort to regain authority over the increasingly rebellious Sahelian countries. And Mali, relying on their economic weaknesses to compel acquiescence, Trump sought to use force to subdue these countries. However, the Sahel has dug in its heels rather than bending the knee. These punitive actions have had a disastrous backlash and haven't done anything to erode the commitment of leaders like Abdourahmane Tiani or Ibrahim Traoré. Instead, they have strengthened the opposition in the area and spread the word about Western exploitation. These acts are perceived by African populations as attempts to penalize countries that dare to demand sovereignty rather than as initiatives to advance stability or governance. By imposing sanctions on Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali, Trump has unintentionally strengthened a narrative that portrays the West as an empire that is determined to hold on to Africa at any costs. This story has inspired protests, grassroots initiatives, and demonstrations in Sahelian streets. A rise in backing for leaders who are now praised as representations of African rebellion and dignity. Once dubious of their government's policies, citizens have come together in support of them, united by a common disgust for what they see as bullying by the West. However, the consequences extend beyond the Sahel. The West was not prepared for the tsunami of continental unity that Trump's actions have sparked. Leaders from Guinea to Chad have openly expressed their support for the struggle in the Sahel, portraying it as a battle for Africa as a whole, not just for the region. What may have been a singular conflict has become a larger movement for African self-determination as a result of this increasing solidarity. Think about Guinea, where President Mamadi Doumbouya has emphasized the need to break free from Western dependence, while echoing the Sahel's demands for statehood. A significant figure in regional politics, Chad has also sided with the Sahelian alliance, intensifying appeals for group action to combat outside meddling. This solidarity is more than just a token gesture. In contrast to Western policy, regional alliances are growing stronger, marking a change in African geopolitics. Powers from around the world who are keen to challenge Western domination have taken notice of the situation outside of Africa. Russia and China have both taken advantage of the chance to portray themselves as supporters of African sovereignty. For example, Beijing has stepped up its win-win rhetoric by providing business partnerships and material support that it says are free of the conditions usually associated with Western aid. Moscow, however, has emphasized its role as a backer of countries opposing neo-imperialism by utilizing its long-standing ties to the continent. This is a strategic nightmare for Trump. His administration has unintentionally given alternative international alliances a platform that devalues America's reputation rather than isolating the Sahel and reclaiming US power. The United States has alienated not only Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali, but also a whole continent that is growing more and more disenchanted with Western intervention by viewing the Sahel's defiance as a danger rather than a chance for communication. A deeper irony is also revealed by this era. In an attempt to regain authority, the very injustices and disparities that the leaders of the Sahel are battling against have come under intense scrutiny from Trump's administration. The United States has effectively confirmed the assertions of African leaders that Western nations are more concerned with preserving their domination than with developing true partnerships by halting aid and enforcing sanctions. The most interesting section comes next. Africa gets more united the more the West resists, provides yet another focal point for a continent fed up with being ruled. Africa's relationship with the West and the rest of the globe may be redefined by the wider movement that started as a Sahelian struggle. Trump's administration has only been successful in emphasizing the power of a unified Africa through its efforts to punish and isolate. It remains to be seen if this unity can result in long-lasting change. However, there is little doubt that the continent is realizing its combined might, and that the West's conventional methods of control are eroding. However, what are the desires of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso? These countries aren't looking for turmoil or seclusion, despite what the West says. They desire anarchy, seclusion, or simplicity. They desire equality, simplicity, decency, and partnerships that honor their sovereignty. Under Traoré's direction, Burkina Faso is making self-sufficiency a top priority. The government is rerouting resources toward domestic growth, restructuring agriculture, and investing in regional sectors. This is about creating a future independent of the West, not about rejecting it. Meanwhile, Niger is advocating for more equitable trade deals. Despite being one of the world's poorest countries, Niger's wealth in uranium has long powered European energy systems. A wider change in how African countries interact with the international economy is being signaled by Chiani's government's demands for contracts that accurately reflect the worth of Niger's resources. Mali is adopting a distinct, although no less audacious strategy. The nation is recovering its cultural identity through educational reform. A new generation that prioritizes sovereignty over subservience is being produced by giving African history, languages, and customs precedence over colonial narratives. Rewriting the guidelines for international relations is at the heart of these countries' demands. They don't oppose the West. They support Africa. Additionally, their disobedience is encouraging other countries to reconsider their ties with superpowers. Can a continental revolution be sparked by Africa's defiance? The quick response, indeed. But not without difficulties. Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have evolved into much more than just rebellious Sahelian countries. They are becoming change agents and symbols of resistance, sparking a broader African movement. Other countries are being prompted to reconsider their ties with foreign powers by their audacious acts, which include recovering national cultural narratives, demanding fair economic agreements, and driving out foreign soldiers. From artistic renaissance to economic reforms, in capitals all around the continent, discussions are being sparked by the Sahel's defiance. While states like Ghana and Nigeria are attentively observing how these countries handle the volatility of defying Western control, Guinea, Chad, and Algeria are publicly endorsing the Sahelian bloc. Many African leaders are asking themselves, if the Sahel can do it, why can't we? However, this is not solely an African tale. These countries are changing the world order by opposing Western domination. Africa has been perceived as a raw material provider and a non-active participant in world politics for many years. That script is being reversed in the Sahel. The world is being forced to face an Africa that will not be disregarded, minimized, or taken advantage of by the actions of Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. Western countries, who have long been used to dictating African policies and controlling their resources, are currently frantically trying to adjust to this new reality. There is increasing pressure on the African Union, which has frequently been chastised for its silence, to join this rising resistance movement. Political independence is only one aspect of the Sahelian revolution. It's about regaining Africa's voice in international decision-making, cultural pride, and economic liberation. Africa will no longer be a pawn in someone else's game, according to this remark. The path ahead won't be simple, of course. The stakes are too high for Western powers to give up their sway easily. The West is already using diplomatic isolation, media portrayals of the Sahel as insecure, and economic sanctions as means of undermining this movement. These countries have major internal challenges. Neo-colonial constructions are being demolished while preserving interior, and Mali must strike a careful balance between opposing outside meddling and establishing strong institutions that can uphold their newly acquired independence. Another possible barrier is the possibility of division within the continent. While many African countries back the Sahel's resistance, others may be reluctant to join this movement since they are largely dependent on Western aid or are subject to Western interests. If this revolution is to be successful on a continental level, the unity of purpose that the leaders of the Sahel have fostered must be extended throughout Africa. Nevertheless, the momentum is indisputable in spite of these obstacles. These three countries' acts have already sparked discussions about equity and sovereignty in places well outside of the Sahel. Activists in South Africa are demanding that the country's business alliances with Western companies be re-examined. In Kenya, land rights and the impact of international farming corporations are topics of increasing discussion. The Sahel's actions have reignited calls for a regional currency free from French control throughout West Africa. Regaining resources and driving out foreign forces are only two aspects of this effort. The goal is to redefine Africa's global role. It's about insisting that Africa be regarded as an equal rather than as a dependent or subordinate. So, will anything change as Trump is re-elected? Is Africa ready to confront Trump as a whole? Do you think Trump will be able to attack a united Africa? Tell us what you think in the comments section below.